with the power to speak new languages did not forget their original tongue, Hebrew. God's Spirit here was also affecting a very different purpose, not of confusing and scattering, but of enlightening and drawing together persons of honest heart into Christian unity. Act 2. 1-21, 37-42. From then on, God's covenant people were a multilingual people, but the barrier created by language difference was overcome because their minds were filled with the common or mutual language of the truth. In unity they spoke in praise of Jehovah and his righteous purposes by Christ Jesus. Thus, the promise at Zephaniah 3:9 saw a fulfillment as Jehovah God gave peoples the change to a pure language, in order for them all to call upon the name of Jehovah, in order to serve him shoulder to shoulder. Compare Isa 66:18. Zakat 23. Re 7. 4, 9, 10. For this to be so, they should all speak in agreement and be fitly united in the same mind and in the same line of thought. 1 Co 1. 10. The purity of the language spoken by the Christian congregation was also because of its being free from words expressing malicious bitterness, anger, wrath, screaming, and similar abusive language, as well as being free from deceit, obscenity, and corruptness. F4. 29, 31. 1 P 3. 10 Christians were to put language to its most exalted use, praising their Creator and upbuilding their neighbor with wholesome, truthful speech, especially the good news about God's kingdom. Mount 24. 14. Tick 2. 7, 8. Heb 13. 15. Compare PS 51. 15. 109. 30. As the time neared for God to execute his judicial decision upon all the nations of the world, Jehovah would enable many more to speak that pure language. The Bible began to be written in the Hebrew language, and some portions were later recorded in Aramaic. Then, in the 1st century of the Common Era, the remainder of the sacred scriptures were written in Koine, or Common Greek, though Matthew wrote his Gospel first in Hebrew. By then a translation had also been made of the Hebrew scriptures into Greek. Called the Septuagint, it was not an inspired translation but, nevertheless, was used by the Christian writers of the Bible in numerous quotations. See inspiration. So, too, the Christian Greek scriptures and eventually the whole Bible came to be translated into other languages, among the earliest being Latin, Syriac, Ethiopic, Arabic, and Persian. As of the present time, the Bible, the whole or in part, is available in well over 3,000 languages. This has facilitated the proclamation of the good news and O texto e acute miritra longo. Last days 205. This city had a major disadvantage. Unlike the nearby city of Hierapolis, with its hot springs famed for their healing properties, and Colossae, with its refreshing cold water, Laodicea had no permanent water supply. From a considerable distance away, water had to be piped to Laodicea and likely was lukewarm on reaching the city. For the initial part of the distance the water was conveyed by means of an aqueduct and then, closer to the city, through cubical stone blocks that were bored through the middle and cemented together. Laodicea seems to have had a considerable number of Jews. According to a letter from Laodicean magistrates as quoted by Josephus, the Jews, in compliance with the injunction of Gaius Rabirius, were allowed to observe their Sabbaths and other sacred rites. Jewish Antiquities, 14, 241-243x, 20. At least some of the Jews there were quite wealthy. This may be deduced from the fact that, when Governor Flaccus ordered the confiscation of the annual contributions that were meant for the temple at Jerusalem, the amount reportedly was found to be more than 20 pounds of gold. In the 1st century CE a Christian congregation existed at Laodicea and apparently met in the home of Nympha, a Christian sister there. Doubtless the efforts of Epaphras contributed to the establishment of that congregation. Col 4. 12, 13, 15. Also, the effects of Paul's work at Ephesus likely reached as far as Laodicea. Act 19. 10. Although not ministering there personally, Paul was nevertheless concerned about the Laodicean congregation and even wrote a letter to them. Col 2. 1. 4. 16. However, some scholars believe that Paul's letter may have been simply a duplicate of the one he sent to Ephesus. Of course, that is only a theory, an effort to account for the fact that the Bible contains no letter from Paul to the Laodiceans, although Paul wrote to them. The letter to Laodicea may simply have contained information not necessary for us today, or it may have repeated points adequately covered in other canonical letters. The congregation at Laodicea was one of the 7 in Asia Minor to which the glorified Jesus Christ, in a revelation to John, addressed personal messages. Re 1. 11 At that time, toward the close of the 1st century CE, the Laodicean congregation had little to commend it. Though materially rich, it was spiritually poor. Instead of the literal gold handled by the Laodicean bankers, instead of the garments of glossy black wool made locally, instead of the eye medicine doubtless produced by the Laodicean medical profession, instead of the boiling hot medicinal waters from the springs of nearby Hierapolis, the Laodicean congregation needed things like these in a spiritual sense. It needed gold refined by fire to enrich its personality. Compare 1 Co 3. 10-14. 1 P 1. 6, 7. White outer garments to give it an irreproachable Christian appearance with no unchristian features that were as shameful as bodily nakedness. Compare E 16. 15. 19. 8. It needed to have spiritual eyesalve applied to take away its blindness to Bible truth and Christian responsibilities. Compare IS 29. 18. 2 P 1. 5-10. 1 Jo 2. 11. It could buy these things from Christ Jesus, the one knocking at the door, if it let him in hospitably to entertain him. Compare Isa 55. 1, 2. It needed to become stimulatingly hot. Compare PS 69. 9. 2 Co 9. 2. Tip 2. 14 or refreshingly cold. Compare PR 25. 13, 25. But not to stay lukewarm. Re 3. 14-22. Lapidoth lap pi middle dot doth possibly, torches. Lightning flashes. The husband of the Israelite prophetess Deborah. JG 4. 4. Lazy or middle dot say. A Cretan city near the harbour called Fair Havens. Act 27. 8 Leisure is usually identified with ruins situated about 8 km 5 mi of modern Kiloilymnians Fair Havens. Lasha. A place mentioned in the earliest Canaanite boundary description. GE 10. 19 Its exact location is uncertain. Either Lasha was Otex to acute Muritra Longo. Last days 206 Nature of the prophecy. This may be a period covering just a few years, or many and can apply to widely separated time periods. Jacob's deathbed prophecy. When Jacob said to his sons, "Gather yourselves together that I may tell you what will happen to you in the final part of the days or in days to come," he meant in that future time, when his words would begin undergoing fulfillment. GE 49. 1/2 centuries earlier Jehovah had stated to Jacob's grandfather Abraham that his offspring would suffer affliction for 400 years. GE 15. 13 Therefore, in this case, the future time referred to by Jacob as the final part of the days could not begin until after the 400 years of affliction ended. For details on Genesis 49, see the articles on the sons of Jacob under their respective names. A later application of the prophecy that would involve the spiritual Israel of God could also be expected. G 6. 16. Row 9. 6. Balaam's prophecy. It was before the Israelites entered the promised land that the prophet Balaam said to Moab's king Balak, "Do come, let me advise you what this people Israel will do to your people afterward in the end of the days. A star will certainly step forth out of Jacob, and a scepter will indeed rise out of Israel. And he will certainly break apart the temples of Moab's head and the cranium of all the sons of tumult of war." New 24. 14-17 In the initial fulfillment of this prophecy, the star proved to be King David, the subduer of the Moabites. 2-8. 2 Evidently, therefore, in that fulfillment of this particular prophecy, the end of the days began with David's becoming king. Since David foreshadowed Jesus as Messianic king, the prophecy would also apply to Jesus at the time when he subdues his enemies. Isa 9. 7. PS 2. 8, 9. The prophecy of Isaiah and Micah. at Isaiah 2. 2 and Micah 4. 1. The word's final part of the days introduce the prophecy about the time when people from all nations would stream to the mountain of the house of Jehovah. In a typical fulfillment, between 29 CE and 70 CE during the final part of the days of the Jewish system of things, Jehovah's worship was exalted above the lofty elevation that pagan nations gave to their false gods. The King, Jesus Christ, made a breakthrough in elevating true worship, and he was followed, first by a remnant of the nation of Israel, and then by people from all nations. Issa 2. 2. Nick 2. 13. Act 10. 34, 35. In an antitypical fulfillment, in the final part of the days of this system of things, Jehovah's worship has been elevated heaven high. The King, Jesus Christ, has led the remnant of spiritual Israel to pure worship, and they have been followed by a great crowd out of all nations. Re 7. 9. Last days of the Jewish system of things. Less than 3.5 years before the non-Jews became part of the Christian congregation, God's Spirit was poured out on faithful Jewish disciples of Jesus Christ. At that time Peter explained that it was in fulfillment of Joel's prophecy, saying, "And in the last days, God says, I shall pour out some of my Spirit upon every sort of flesh. And I will give portents in heaven above and signs on earth below, blood and fire and smoke mist. The sun will be turned into darkness and the moon into blood before the great and illustrious day of Jehovah arrives." Act 2. 16-20. In this case the last days preceded the great and illustrious day of Jehovah, which day apparently brought the last days to their conclusion. Compares at 1. 14-18. Mal 4. 5. Mount 11. 13, 14. See Day of Jehovah. Since Peter addressed natural Jews and Jewish proselytes, his words must have had particular reference to them and evidently indicated that they were living in the last days of the then existing Jewish system of things with its center of worship at Jerusalem. Earlier, Christ Jesus himself had foretold the destruction of Jerusalem, and ipso texto acute mirita longo, Latin 207, slyly work their way into households and lead as their captives weak women loaded down with sins, led by various desires, always learning and yet never able to come to an accurate knowledge of truth. 2t3. 1-7. Next Paul contrasted such corrupt persons with Timothy, who had closely followed the apostles' teaching, and encouraged him to continue in the things that he had learned and been persuaded to believe. 2t3. 8-17. See also 2t4. 3-5. Thus from the context it is clear that the apostle was informing Timothy well in advance about future developments among professed Christians and describing what fruitage such apostasy would finally yield. Similarly, the apostle Peter provided advance knowledge to fellow Christians about pressures from within the congregation. There will also be false teachers among you. These very ones will quietly bring in destructive sects and will disown even the honor that brought them, bringing speedy destruction upon themselves. Furthermore, many will follow their acts of loose conduct. 2 Pe 2. 1, 2. This same warning is echoed in Jude's words encouraging Christians to put up a hard fight for the faith. As for you, beloved ones, call to mind the sayings that have been previously spoken by the apostles of our Lord Jesus Christ, how they used to say to you, "In the last time there will be ridiculers, proceeding according to their own desires for ungodly things." Jude 3, 17, 18. Toward the close of the 1st century CE, apostate elements were clearly in evidence. In our day the full fruitage of such apostasy is clearly evident. The last days to which Paul referred have arrived. The conclusion of the system of things. However, as Jesus Christ had foretold, the apostasy did not take in the entire body of Christians. The true, loyal ones were to be as wheat associated with weeds. After Christ's presence begins, invisible, in spirit, and during the conclusion of the system of things then existing, a clear separation and demarcation was to be made evident. The weeds, the sons of the wicked one, were to be collected out of the kingdom of the Son of Man. This cleaning out of the true Christian congregation would leave a field of clean wheat. The false, imitation Christians would be outside the true Christian congregation. Whereas the weed-like ones would finally be pitched into the fiery furnace, the wheat-like ones would shine as brightly as the sun in the kingdom of their Father. Mount 13. 24-30, 37-43. This definitely pointed to the concluding portion of the system of things under Satan's wicked rule, preceding its destruction. Furthermore, the illustration suggested that the apostasy would bear its full fruitage of wickedness during the conclusion of the system of things under Satan's control. Reasonably, therefore, at that time the conditions described by the writers of the Christian Greek scriptures as marking the last days would be in evidence on a large scale among professed Christians. There would be increasing lawlessness and disobedience to parents. Persons would be lovers of pleasures rather than lovers of God, having a form of godly devotion, but proving false to its power. 2t3. 2-5 Also, there would be ridiculers with their ridicule, proceeding according to their own desires and saying, "Where is this promised presence of his? Why, from the day our forefathers fell asleep in death, all things are continuing exactly as from creation's beginning." 2p3. 3-4. The prophetic illustration of Jesus also showed that time had to pass before the weed-like ones would become fully manifest, finally to be destroyed. Since the apostles knew this, their use of last days and like expressions in connection with the apostasy did not mean that they expected Jesus' presence and the subsequent destruction of the ungodly right away. As Paul pointed out to the Thessalonians. However, brothers, respecting the presence o textoi acute miritra longo, that is 208 the Latin Vulgate, by Jerome of the 4th and 5th centuries CE second only to the Greek Septuagint as a noted ancient Bible translation. Latin was the language of Imperial Rome and hence, when Jesus Christ was on earth, it was the official language of Palestine, though not the popular language of the people. It is therefore not surprising to find some Latinisms in the Christian Greek scriptures. The word Latin itself occurs but once in the Bible, at John 19:20, where we are told that the inscription placed above Jesus on the torture stake was written in Hebrew, Greek, and Latin. Latin in the Christian Greek scriptures occurs in various forms. They contain over 40 proper Latin names of persons and places, such as Aquila, Luke, Mark, Paul, Caesarea, and Tiberias. In this part of the Bible are found Greek equivalents of some 30 Latin words of military, judicial, monetary, and domestic nature, such as centurio Mr. 15. 39, army officer, denarius mount 20. 2, and speculator Mr. 6. 27, bodyguardsman. Certain Latin expressions or idioms also occur, such as wishing to satisfy the crowd Mr. 15. 15 and taking sufficient security. Act 17. 9. The syntax, or pattern of phrases and sentences, sometimes suggests Latin influence. However, the amount of this is disputed by various scholars. Latinisms are found mostly in Mark and Matthew, Mark having used them more than any other Bible writer. This lends credence to the belief that he wrote his gospel in Roman mainly for Gentiles, particularly the Romans. Paul made little use of Latinisms. None occur in the Greek Septuagint. The appearance of Latinisms in the scriptures is of more than academic interest to Bible lovers. It is in keeping with what the Bible shows about Palestine's being occupied by Rome when Jesus Christ was on earth. Further, the use of these Latinisms by the best secular Greek writers of the same period argues that the Christian scriptures were indeed produced during the times about which they tell. This fact, therefore, further testifies to the authenticity of the Christian Greek scriptures. Lattice. A framework consisting of crossed strips of wood, or laths, forming a network and generally used to cover a window. For centuries window lattices have been common in the Middle East. They have served to keep houses cool by blocking out the direct rays of the sun, while allowing for ventilation, and they also have contributed favorably to the general appearance of buildings. Some houses of biblical times had ground floor windows facing an inner courtyard and others facing the street. The latter were usually high up on the wall or in the roof chamber and were latticed. A person in the house could look out through a latticed window and see what was taking place out of doors without being seen from the outside. In the Song of Deborah and Barak, the mother of slain Sisera is represented as futilely looking out from a window and watching for her son from the lattice. JG 5. 1:28 It was from a window through a lattice that it was possible for an observer to look down on a young man in want of heart as he came in contact with a prostitute. PR 7. 6-13 Also, in the Song of Solomon 2. 9, reference is made to gazing through the windows, glancing through the lattices. Some window lattices were evidently hinged so that they could be opened or closed. The windows of Daniel's roof chamber, from which he could be seen praying to Jehovah 3 times daily, may have had lattices that could be opened or shut. Dar 6. 10. Laughter. The Hebrew words for laughter tsekak and the parallel form sekak are, according to Gesenius, onomatopoeic, that is, they are imitative of the sound of laughter as are the written English interjections ho-ho and ha-ha. Isaac's name, Yitzmiddle.chak, also meaning laughter, has this same mimetic quality. Both Abraham and Sarah laughed at the angelic announcement, so textoi acute miritra longo, laughter 209 when appropriate. Jehovah is the happy God and wants his servants to be happy. 1:1. 11. However, the scriptures show that laughter is fitting only at certain times. There is a time to weep and a time to laugh. EC 3. 1. For the wise man, King Solomon, counsels us. Go, eat your food with rejoicing, and drink your wine with a good heart, because already the true God has found pleasure in your works. However, there is no real cause for rejoicing if one's activity shows disregard for the righteous ways of God. EC 9. 7. When inappropriate. The thing of importance is to live so that one achieves a good name with Jehovah. Therefore, in this system of things, laughter may at times be most inappropriate, even harmful. Solomon, in his experiment to lay hold on folly until I could see what good there was to the sons of mankind in what they did, said in his heart, "To come now, let me try you out with rejoicing. Also, see good." But he discovered that it was a vain pursuit. He found that mirth and laughter in themselves are not truly satisfying, for they fail to produce real and lasting happiness. There must be a true foundation for enduring, upbuilding joy. Solomon voiced his feelings. I said to laughter, insanity. And to rejoicing, what is this doing? EC2. 1-3. Solomon illustrates the wisdom of not merely living for the pursuit of enjoyment. He says, better is it to go to the house of mourning than to go to the banquet house, because that is the end of all mankind. And the one alive should take it to his heart. This is no recommendation for sadness as superior to rejoicing. It refers to a specific time, to the time when a person has died and the house is in mourning. Go there to console the sad survivors rather than callously forget them and feast and revel. Visiting the mourners would not only comfort the bereaved, but also induce the visitor to remember life's brevity, to know that the death that has come to this house will come to all soon enough, and that those living should keep it in mind. It is while a person is still living that he can make a good name, not when he is dying. And a good name with God is the only thing of real value to the dying. EC 7. 2. GE 50. 10. Joe 11. 31. Solomon goes on to say, better is vexation than laughter, for by the crossness of the face the heart becomes better. EC 7. 3. Laughter is good medicine, but there are times when we must soberly view our life and the way we are living it. If we see we are wasting too much time in frivolous feasting, and not making a good name by doing good works, we have reason to be vexed with ourselves, to be sorry, and to change. It will make our heart better. It will help us make a good name so that the day of our death or the time of our final inspection by God in Christ will be better for us than the day of our birth. EC 7. 1. The heart of the wise ones is in the house of mourning, but the heart of the stupid ones is in the house of rejoicing, Solomon goes on to say. Better is it to hear the rebuke of someone wise than to be the man hearing the song of the stupid ones. EC 7. 4. 5. The wise heart in a house where one has died is attuned to the seriousness that is natural in a house of bereavement, and it influences the wise heart to watch how one's life is lived, but the careless mood in a place of revelry appeals to the foolish heart and causes life to be faced with a shallow, reckless spirit. If a person is straying from right paths, the rebuke of a wise man will put him back in the way of life by correcting him and enabling him to make a good name for himself. But how can hearing a fool's song or empty flattery that conceals faults and hardens us in a wrong course be helpful? It would induce us to keep on making a bad name, not correcting us into ways leading to a good name with Jehovah. For as the sound of thorns under the pot, so is the laughter of the stupid one. And this o textoi acute muritra longo, laundryman 210 give way to misery and mourn and weep. Let your laughter be turned into mourning, and your joy into dejection. Humble yourselves in the eyes of Jehovah, and he will exalt you. Just 4, 9, 10 Such exaltation would bring genuine happiness. To express derision. Laughter figures prominently in the scriptures as an expression of derision. The Hebrew verb zamidl. Laugh also has the meaning poke fun. Make a laughing stock. GE 21. 9. 39. 14. Even members of the animal creation are depicted as laughing in scorn. The female ostrich is represented as laughing at the pursuing horse and its rider because of her speed, and the horse as laughing at dread when going into battle, because of his strength and fearlessness. Job 39. 13, 18, 19, 22 Leviathan the crocodile is said to laugh at the rattling of a javelin, because of his heavy armor. Job 41. 1, 29. Servants of God have had to endure much derisive laughter against them. Job said, one who is a laughing stock to his fellow men I become. Job 12. 4. 30. 1 Jeremiah was an object of laughter all day long among his contemporaries. Job 20. 7 Jesus Christ himself was laughed at scornfully before raising the daughter of Jairus from death. Mount 9. 24. Mr. 5. 40. Lu 8. 41-53 Yet, all who knew the strength and wisdom of God and were obedient to him had good reason to be happy. Mount 5. 11, 12. Jehovah God is described as laughing in derision at the nations, at their boastful words, which come to nothing, and at the confusion their foolish course against him brings. PS 59. 8 He knows his own power and purposes, and he laughs at the puny, futile opposition they bring against him and his people. PS 2. 1-4 A wise person surely wants to avoid having Jehovah laugh at him. PR 1. 26 While Jehovah has no pleasure in the death of the wicked as 18. 23, 32 He is unworried over their plots against his people and laughs, because he sees the day of deliverance for the righteous, in which the schemes of the wicked will fail and wickedness will be ended forever. PS 37. 12, 13, 20. Laundryman. One who in Bible times washed used clothing, and who also processed new cloth by bleaching and shrinking it and removing the oils in preparation for dyeing. In Hebrew the term is evidently from a root meaning trample, that is, to wash by stamping with the feet to loosen the dirt. Mal 3. 2. Sea bathing. The Greek word for clothes clean phos is related to gnaphos prickly teasel. Carding Coman refers to one who dresses new cloth or washes and scours soiled garments. Clothes cleaners of ancient times were likely able to whiten their clothing considerably by cleaning and bleaching. Yet, when describing the incomparable whiteness of Jesus' garments at the transfiguration scene, Mark says, his outer garments became glistening, far whiter than any clothes cleaner on earth could whiten them. Mr. 9. 3. Alkali. In Hebrew the word for alkali is anidashtha, a carbonate of soda, also called natron. It is termed mineral alkali, to distinguish it from vegetable alkali. Natron was a native grade of the chemical, commercial grades of which are known as soda ash and sal soda. Its effervescence when mixed with a weak acid is alluded to at Proverbs 25. 20. Though in some translations it is called niter, it should not be confused with modern nitoniter, also called a saltpeter, which may be either potassium or sodium nitrate. By itself or as a soap builder this alkali is a very effective cleaner. This fact adds force to Jehovah's words as to the depth of Israel's sinfulness. Though you should do the washing with alkali and take to yourself large quantities of lye, your error would certainly be a stain before me. 2. 22. The ancient world obtained this alkali from several sources of supply. From lakes or from deposits in Syria, India, Egypt, and along the southeastern shores of the Dead Sea. It is reported that, in addition to using it textoi acute muritra longo, law 211 potash, The Hebrew word bor is translated potash NW, so big, liat, at Job 9. 30. There it is spoken of as being used for cleansing the hands. This cleanser is thought to be either potassium carbonate or sodium carbonate. The way it was made gives it the name potash. Wort ashes were first leached, then the solution was boiled down in pots. Laundryman's field. Apparently an area close to the city of Jerusalem where laundrymen worked. Isaiah and his son Shear-Jashub were to meet King Ahaz by the highway of the laundryman's field. Later, Sennacherib's emissaries came to the same vicinity. 2 Kai 18. 17. Issa 7. 3. 36. 2 While this highway of the laundryman's field was obviously outside the city, it was near enough that the taunts of Sennacherib's messengers could be heard by those on the city walls. 2 Kai 18. 18, 26, 27. Issa 36. 1, 2. A conduit is mentioned in connection with the highway of the laundryman's field. This could not refer to what is called Hezekiah's tunnel, as that had not yet been constructed in Ahaz's day. The conduit therefore seems to have been one that ran through the torrent valley of Kidron down to the ascent of the city of David. The laundryman's field appears to have been located either in this part of the valley or somewhat farther near the suggested site of Unrogel. Laurel Heb. Oren. An evergreen, often growing as a shrub, but capable of heights up to some 15 meters, 50 feet. The entire tree leaves, bark, roots, and fruit contains an oil long employed in medicine. The leaves are oblong and leathery, with a glossy upper side. This tree is mentioned as the last of several trees in Isaiah 44. 14. It is the only reference to the tree in the Hebrew Scriptures. Lexicon in Veteris Testamenti Libros by L. Kula and W. Baumgartner, Leiden, 1958, p. 88 identifies the name with the laurel tree Laurus nobilis, also commonly called the sweet bay tree. See also the Interpreter's Dictionary of the Bible, edited by J. A. Buttrick, 1962, Volume 2, p. 293. The Laurus nobilis is found from the coast on up into the middle mountain regions of Palestine and grows in other Mediterranean countries as well. Laurel leaves were used by the ancient Greeks to form wreaths, which they placed on the heads of victors in the Pythian Games and also extended to those holding certain offices as a symbol of distinction. Law. 1. The principles and regulations emanating from a government and applicable to a people, whether in the form of legislation or of custom and policies recognized and enforced by judicial decision. 2. Any written or positive rule, or collection of rules, prescribed under the authority of the state or nation. The American College Dictionary, edited by C. L. Barnhart, 1966. A divine commandment or a revelation of the will of God. The whole body of God's commandments or revelations. The will of God. A rule of right living or good conduct, especially when conceived as having the sanction of God's will, of conscience or the moral nature, or of natural justice. Webster's Third Year International Dictionary, 1981. The word law, in the Hebrew Scriptures, is translated primarily from the Hebrew word Torah, related to the verb ra, meaning direct, teach, instruct. In some cases it is translated from the Aramaic term dath. Da 6. 5, 8, 15 other words translated in the King James Version as law pat judicial decision, judgment, and y commandment. In the Greek Scriptures the word omos, from the verb enemo deal out, distribute, is translated law. Jehovah God is designated as the source of law, the supreme lawgiver. Isa 33. 22, the sovereign, delegating authority. PS 73. 28. Jah 50. 25. Lu 2. 29. Ak 4. 24. Re 6. 10, without whose permission or allowance no authority can be exercised. Row 13. 1. Da 4. 35. Ak 17. 24-31 His throne is established on righteousness and judgment. PS 97. 1, Tuo textoi acute muritra longo. Law 212 and Earth Act 4. 24. Re 4. 11. Jehovah has established laws governing all created things. Job 38. 10 speaks of a regulation on the sea. Job 38. 12. Of commanding the morning. And Job 38. 31-33 calls attention to star constellations and to the statutes of the heavens. The same chapter points to God as governing the light, snow, hail, clouds, rain, dew, and lightning. Continuing to chapters 39 through 41, God's care for the animal kingdom is shown, and the birth, life cycles, and habits of animals are attributed to regulations laid down by God, not to any evolutionary adaptation. In fact, in the very creating of life forms, God incorporated a law that each was to bring forth according to its kind, making evolution impossible. Ge 1. 11, 12, 21, 24, 25 Man also brought forth sons in his likeness, in his image. Ge 5. 3 at Psalm 139. 13-16 The embryonic growth of a child in the womb is spoken of, its parts being written down in Jehovah's book before any of them actually existed. Job 26. 7 describes Jehovah as hanging the earth upon nothing. Scientists today attribute the Earth's position in space primarily to the interaction of the law of gravity and the law of centrifugal force. Law to Adam. In the Garden of Eden, Adam and Eve were commanded by God concerning their duties: 1 to fill the earth, 2 to subdue it, and 3 to have in subjection all other living creatures of earth, sea, and air. Ge 1. 28 They were given laws as to their diet, granting them the seed-bearing vegetation and fruit as food. Ge 1. 29. 2. 16 However, Adam was given a command that prohibited eating from the tree of the knowledge of good and bad. Ge 2. 17. This command was transmitted to Eve. Ge 3. 2, 3 Adam is referred to as a transgressor and a trespasser because he violated a stated law. Row 5. 14, 17. 4. 15. Laws to Noah. Patriarchal law. Noah was given commandments relative to the building of the ark and the saving of his family. Ge 6. 22 After the flood he was given laws that allowed the adding of flesh to man's diet. Declared the sacredness of life and therefore of blood, in which is the life. Prohibited the eating of blood. Condemned murder. And instituted capital punishments for this crime. Ge 9. 3-6. The patriarch was a family head and ruler. Jehovah is designated as the great family head, or patriarch, the father, to whom every family in heaven and on earth owes its name. F3. 14, 15 Noah, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob are outstanding examples of patriarchs. These were especially dealt with by Jehovah. Abraham was given the command to circumcise all the males of his household as a sign of God's covenant with him. Ge 17. 11, 12 He observed Jehovah's commands, statutes, and laws. He knew Jehovah's way to do righteousness and judgment, and he laid these commands on his household. Ge 26. 4, 5. 18. 19. The laws that governed the patriarchs were also generally understood and partially reflected in the laws of the nations at that time, all of which nations sprang from the 3 sons of Noah, the patriarch. For example, the Pharaoh of Egypt knew that it was wrong to take another man's wife. Ge 12. 14-20, as did the kings of the Philistines in the cases of Sarah and Rebekah. Ge 20. 2-6. 26. 7-11. In the days of Moses, the Israelites were in slavery to Egypt. They had voluntarily gone into Egypt during Jacob's lifetime, but were enslaved after Jacob's son, the Prime Minister Joseph, had died. So, in effect, they were sold into slavery for nothing. Jehovah, in harmony with the patriarchal law of redemption and of the priority of the firstborn son, told Pharaoh, by the mouth of Moses and Aaron, Israel is my son, my firstborn. And I say to you, send my son away that he may serve me. But should you refuse to send him away, here I am killing your son, your firstborn. X4. 22, 23 No redemption price was necessary for this release, nor was any given to Egypt. And when our text to acute miritra longo, law 213th. GE 48. 22. 1 ch 5. 1 The oldest son normally became the patriarchal head when the father died. Sons, after marriage, could establish households separate from the father's headship and could themselves become family heads. Morals. Fornication was disgraceful and punishable, especially in cases of engaged persons or married persons' adultery. GE 38. 24-26. 34. 7 Brother-in-law marriage was practiced when a man died without a son. His brother then had the responsibility to take the widow as his wife, and the firstborn of their union would inherit the dead man's estate and carry on his name. De 25. 5, 6. GE 38. 6-26. Property. Generally there seems to have been no holding of individual property, aside from a few personal belongings. All herds, household goods, and equipment were held in common by the family. GE 31. 14-16. On the basis of related historical evidence, some scholars believe that, in transferring land, the buyer was shown the land from a vantage point, the exact boundaries being designated. When the buyer said, "I see," he indicated legal acceptance. When Jehovah gave Abraham the promise of receiving the land of Canaan, Abraham was first told to look in all 4 directions. Abraham did not say, "I see," perhaps because God said that he would give the promised land to Abraham's seed, later on. GE 13. 14, 15 Moses, as the legal representative of Israel, was told to see the land, which, if the view just discussed is correct, would indicate legal transfer of the land to Israel, for them to take it under Joshua's leadership. De 3. 27, 28. 34. 4. Consider also Satan's offer to Jesus at Mount 4. 8. Another action appearing to have similar legal flavor was walking across the land or entering it for the purpose of taking possession. GE 13. 17. 28. 13 In certain ancient documents, the number of trees on a piece of land was listed at each real estate sale. Compare GE 23. 17, 18. Custody. Legal responsibility came when an individual promised to keep or guard a person, animal, or thing. GE 30. 31 Reuben, as the firstborn of Jacob, was responsible in the case of Joseph's disappearance. GE 37. 21, 22, 29, 30 The custodian was to give sufficient care to what was in his charge. He had to restore animals stolen, but not those that died of themselves or that were lost through events beyond his control, such as a raid by armed sheep rustlers. If an animal was killed by a wild beast, evidence of the torn animal had to be produced to clear the custodian of responsibility. GE 37. 12-30, 32, 33. X22. 10-13. Slavery. Slaves might be purchased or might be such through birth to slave parents. GE 17. 12, 27 Slaves could enjoy a very honored position in the patriarchal household, as was the case with Abraham's servant Eliezer. GE 15. 2. 24. 1-4. Law of God to Israel. The Law of Moses. Jehovah gave Israel the law through Moses as mediator, in the wilderness of Sinai, 1513 BCE. At the inauguration of the law at Mount Horeb there was an awe-inspiring demonstration of Jehovah's power. X19. 16-19. 20. 18-21. Hob 12. 18-21, 25, 26 The covenant was validated by the blood of bulls and goats. The people presented communion offerings, and they heard the book of the covenant read to them, after which they agreed to be obedient to all that Jehovah had spoken. Many of the early patriarchal laws were incorporated in the law given through Moses. X24. 3-8. Hob 9. 15-21. See Covenant. The first 5 books of the Bible, Genesis through Deuteronomy, are often referred to as the law. Sometimes this term is used with reference to the entire inspired Hebrew scriptures. Generally, however, the Jews considered the entire Hebrew scriptures to be composed of 3 sections: the Law of Moses,